In 1940, one man made a decision so irrational that even his own allies thought he was completely insane. He volunteered to be arrested by the Nazis. Not to try and escape, not to spy from the outside, but to enter Auschwitz, on purpose. What he found inside would later be described as impossible to survive. And yet, survival was never his real mission. Let's rewind. Witold Pilecki was not a criminal, he was not reckless, and he was certainly not suicidal. He was a decorated Polish cavalry officer, a husband, a loving father of two. When Poland fell to Nazi Germany in 1939, Pilecki refused to accept defeat. He immediately joined the underground resistance, the Tajna Armia. In those chaotic early days of the occupation, information was scarce, and rumors spread like wildfire. People were disappearing from the streets. Entire neighborhoods were vanishing without explanation. And one name kept coming back in hushed, fearful whispers: Auschwitz. At the time, Auschwitz was not yet known to the world as the death camp it would become. It was vaguely described by the occupiers as a detention facility or a large-scale prison. But the truth was a black box. No one inside could send reliable information out. No one who entered ever seemed to return. The resistance was flying blind, desperate for credible intelligence. So Pilecki proposed something truly unthinkable. He would go in. He would willingly walk into the lion's den. Once inside, he would gather intelligence, organize a resistance network among the prisoners, and report the truth to the outside world. His superiors were stunned. They tried to talk him out of it, calling the mission a death sentence. But Pilecki was resolute. On September 19, 1940, during a massive street roundup in Warsaw, Witold Pilecki saw his chance. While others ran and hid, he deliberately stepped out into the open. He gave a false name, Tamush Serafivsky. He allowed himself to be beaten by the SS guards and herded onto a transport train packed with nearly 2,000 other civilians. As the grim iron gates of Auschwitz slammed shut behind him, he was stripped of his name and became prisoner 4,859. What he witnessed next would challenge the very limits of human endurance and belief. Pilecki's first report, smuggled out through a network of contacts, was a bombshell. He described the systematic starvation, the brutal beatings, the daily executions. He detailed the horrific medical experiments and the construction of the first gas chambers. His dispatches were shocking, almost unbelievable. He wrote, "Here, we are not in a sanatorium. Inside the camp, Pilecki created an underground organization known as the Związek, Organization Voice Code, or ZOW. This secret network worked tirelessly to improve morale, smuggle food and medicine to the sick, and gather even more detailed intelligence. They prepared for an uprising, hoping to liberate the camp with help from an outside attack by the Polish Home Army. Pilecki's reports were sent to Warsaw, and from there, to the Allied governments in London. But his reports were often dismissed as exaggerations. The scale of the horror he described was simply too immense for the outside world to comprehend. After nearly 2.5 years inside the hell of Auschwitz, Pilecki realized that the Allies were not coming. The camp's security had been tightened, and the Gestapo was closing in on his network. Staying any longer meant certain death and the potential collapse of his entire intelligence operation. So, on the night of April 26, 1943, he and 2 comrades executed a daring escape. After the war, however, Poland fell under the control of a new totalitarian regime. The Soviet-backed communist government, Pilecki, remained a patriot. He refused to leave his country and instead began gathering intelligence on the new government's atrocities. In 1947, he was arrested by the secret police, brutally tortured, and put on a sham trial. He was accused of being a Western imperialist spy and sentenced to death. Before his execution, he told his wife, "I cannot live." On May 25, 1948, Witold Pilecki was executed with a shot to the back of the head. His story was erased from Polish history for decades. Today, Pilecki is remembered as one of the greatest heroes of the 20th century, a man who volunteered for Auschwitz, a man who faced down two of the most brutal regimes in history, armed with little more than his own courage. His life is a testament to the incredible power of one individual to stand up for truth and humanity in the face of unimaginable darkness. Auschwitz didn't begin with gas chambers. It began with hunger. It began with fear, and it began with silence. For Witold Pilecki, the first lesson was immediate. Life inside the camp was designed to break the human spirit long before it destroyed the body. The reality was brutal and relentless. Prisoners were beaten for walking too slowly. They were executed for looking the wrong way. They were starved until they started to forget their own names. Every single morning, bodies were removed from the barracks. And every single night, new transports arrived, bringing more faces, more fear. Pilecki understood very quickly. If he was going to survive, he had to become invisible. He had to blend into the system, disappear among the thousands of other prisoners. No heroics, no open resistance. At least, not yet. But even in that darkness, a flicker of defiance remained. Within weeks, Pilecki began to notice others like him. Former soldiers, teachers, doctors, men who, despite the horror, still believed the war was not over. Quietly, carefully, he started to build something the Nazis believed was impossible. An underground resistance network, right there inside Auschwitz. They called themselves the Związek Organizacji Wojskowych, or ZOW. Their goals were simple, yet deadly dangerous. First, share food and information to keep as many people alive as possible. Second, document every Nazi crime they witnessed. And third, prepare for a future uprising, a moment to fight back. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about preserving humanity and gathering evidence. They established a secret communication system, smuggled medicine, and even set up a makeshift news service to counter the constant Nazi propaganda and raise morale. Every shared piece of bread, every whispered piece of news, was an act of rebellion. But just gathering information wasn't enough. The world outside had no idea what Auschwitz truly was. The reports reaching the Allies were vague, incomplete. So Pilecki did something no prisoner had ever done before. He found a way to send detailed reports from inside the camp to the outside world. He and his network built a secret radio transmitter and used brave Polish workers who came into the camp for construction projects as couriers. These messages described the systematic executions, the starvation as a weapon, the horrifying efficiency of the murder machine. They were among the very first eyewitness reports of the Holocaust, smuggled out at unimaginable risk. Each report was a potential death sentence for everyone involved. But here's the devastating part of the story. The Allies received the reports. The British government, the Polish government in exile, they read them, and they did nothing. No bombs were dropped on the railway lines leading to the camp. No rescue operations were launched. As the killings inside Auschwitz escalated, as the crematoria began to work day and night, Pilecki was forced to face a terrible truth. If Auschwitz was going to be stopped, it wasn't going to be by help from the outside. It would have to be destroyed from within. And that meant attempting something even more impossible than volunteering to enter the camp in the first place. He had to escape. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as powerful as I did, please like and subscribe for more chapters from history that need to be told. By 1943, Auschwitz had changed. The methodical cruelty of the early days had evolved into something far more terrifying. The killings were faster, more organized, more final. This was no longer just a camp. It was a factory of death, operating with chilling industrial efficiency. And inside, a Polish army officer named Witold Pilecki knew one thing for certain. If he stayed, he would die before the world ever believed his story. For nearly 3 years, Pilecki had volunteered to be imprisoned in Auschwitz. He had intentionally walked into hell to gather intelligence for the Polish resistance. He survived brutal beatings, rampant disease, near starvation, and the constant threat of execution lists. But survival was no longer the mission. The mission was proof. He had seen the gas chambers. He had documented the horror. Now, he needed to get that information out. He needed to leave Auschwitz alive, a feat almost no one had ever accomplished. The stakes were impossibly high. If he failed, the Nazis wouldn't just execute him. They would hunt down and execute his family, his friends, everyone connected to him. His failure meant their deaths. Pilecki's plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. He chose a night shift at the camp bakery. It was a calculated risk. The bakery was located just outside the main camp fence. This meant it was closer to freedom, but also closer to armed guards and a swift, violent death. He couldn't do it alone. He recruited 2 other prisoners he trusted implicitly, Jan Redstich and Edward Szylski. The date was set, the night of April 26, 1943. Under the cover of darkness, the 3 men made their move. They overpowered a guard, a moment of chaos where everything could have gone wrong. They cut the phone lines to prevent an immediate alarm. They stole documents, anything that might help them or hinder the Nazis. And then, they ran. Immediately, the air exploded with the sound of gunshots. The piercing beams of searchlights sliced through the night, hunting for them. For hours, they scrambled through the darkness, their hearts pounding in their chests. They hid in forests, plunged into icy ditches, and burrowed into the hay of barns, moving only when the terrifying silence returned. Praying they hadn't been seen. The escape was a grueling ordeal. For 7 days they traveled, navigating by the stars, avoiding towns and roads. They had no food, no water, and barely a moment's sleep, driven forward by pure adrenaline and the desperate will to live. Finally, exhausted and emaciated, they stumbled into the home of a Polish family who risked their own lives to give them shelter. Against all odds, Witold Pilecki had escaped Auschwitz. But once he was free, he did not rest. He couldn't. The images from the camp were burned into his mind. He immediately began to write. He poured everything onto the page, creating what would become known as Pilecki's report. He wrote down detailed accounts of the camp's operations. He listed names of SS officers. He estimated the staggering numbers of victims. He described the methods of extermination, the gas chambers, the crematoria, in unflinching detail. He handed his report to the Polish resistance, who smuggled it to the Allies in London. He begged them, pleaded with them to act. Bomb the railway lines leading to the camp. Launch an air raid on Auschwitz itself. Do something, anything, to stop the trains that arrived every single day, packed with innocent people. His reports were read. The highest levels of Allied command saw his words. They knew what was happening. And once again, just as before when he sent messages from inside the camp, they did nothing. The Allied leadership dismissed the report as an exaggeration. They couldn't believe, or perhaps didn't want to believe, that something so monstrous was possible. So Auschwitz continued its horrific work. The trains kept coming. Millions more would be murdered before the war's end. And Witold Pilecki, the man who had risked everything to warn the world, was now faced with a soul-crushing question that would define the rest of his life. If the world refused to listen, if his sacrifice had been for nothing, should he stop fighting? Or should he return to the war, knowing it would almost certainly kill him? Because, as tragic as his story had been so far, the most heartbreaking part was still to come. He volunteered for Auschwitz. He survived, but he would not survive peace. This is the story of Witold Pilecki, a man whose courage defied not one, but 2 of the 20th century's most brutal regimes. The year is 1945. Nazi Germany has been defeated. The concentration camps are liberated. The world is finally learning the horrifying truth about the Holocaust. In part, thanks to men like Pilecki, who willingly entered Auschwitz to gather intelligence and organize resistance from within. You'd think this would be the end of his struggle. But for Poland, one occupation was simply replaced by another. The country didn't become free. Instead, it fell under the iron grip of Soviet control. And to the new communist government, heroes like Pilecki were not celebrated. They were seen as a threat. They were independent thinkers, patriots, loyal to a free Poland, not to Moscow. They were uncontrolled, and they were impossible to silence. After the war, Pilecki had a choice. His allies in the West offered him a way out, a safe life, a new identity, a quiet existence far from the turmoil of his homeland. He could have left it all behind. He refused. Instead, he made an almost unbelievable decision. He voluntarily returned to Poland. This time, his mission wasn't to fight the Nazis, but to report on the new wave of terror being unleashed by the Soviets against his own people. He was creating a new intelligence network, documenting arrests, executions, and the deportations of Polish soldiers and civilians to Siberia. Once again, he chose truth over his own survival. This bravery would come at a terrible price. In 1947, Pilecki was arrested by the communist secret police. What he endured next was, in his own words, worse than his time in the camps. He was brutally tortured. The interrogations were relentless, involving severe beatings and sleep deprivation. He later told his wife that by comparison, Auschwitz was a children's game. The communists were determined to break him, to force a false confession, to turn a national hero into a traitor. His trial was a complete sham, a piece of political theater. The charges were fabricated. The evidence he had gathered against the Soviets was ignored. His incredible service to Poland, including his heroic mission in Auschwitz, was erased from the record as if it never happened. On May 25, 1948, Witold Pilecki was executed in a Warsaw prison with a single shot to the back of the head. He was only 47 years old. His body was dumped in an unmarked grave, its location kept secret to prevent it from becoming a shrine. The communist regime then began the process of wiping him from history itself. His name was removed from books and records. For decades, simply speaking his name in public was a crime in Poland. An entire generation grew up without ever hearing about one of their nation's greatest heroes. Justice, when it finally came, arrived far too late. It was only after the fall of communism in 1989 that Pilecki's story could be told. The new, democratic Poland officially exonerated him. All charges were dropped, and he was posthumously awarded the country's highest honors. He was finally recognized for what he was, a national hero and one of the bravest men of the Second World War. But he never lived to see his name cleared or his country free. It reminds us that fighting for the truth is a battle that never really ends. Some heroes die in the heat of battle. Others, like Witold Pilecki, die because their truth makes people uncomfortable. Thanks for watching. If you believe stories like this need to be told, be sure to subscribe and share.